here too, so there we are.
I don't know if he's coming or not.
All right, you're all live.
Yes. Yes. Just a thumbs up. Oh, yeah?
Oh, so that means a 4-day weekend, because we
Probably
don't
won't
Monday,
be
didn't
people around.
No school Monday.
Yeah, a 4-day weekend.
We won't be
Nice.
able to go to different schools, but.
Not that it matters for us adults, but for kids, it's nice.
I was down there for 2 years.
I didn't ask, I should have.
Well, I have 2 secretaries that work for me, and both of them called and said, won't be in tomorrow because our kids,
I would have been
Oh,
there in
school.
80.
you know, they both work just when their kids are at school, they drop the kids off, and then they come in and then they leave, you know, half hour before their kids are out of school, so.
But I bombed the LSAT, so I ended up back.
Billy.
That was a terrible sport.
Maybe he knows.
You can't score much more than that.
Darren coming?
He said he was.
Hey, do it.
Hey.
When we first went in, we were checking out churches, and I was still Baptist, and she was second reformed.
Yeah.
So they said, oh, you got a mixed marriage, how did you make that work?
Very important, very important. What's her main name?
Smith,
I just got this from Bill.
SMIT.
Okay.
Okay, that must be what the name was.
There's more German
Remember
there.
this guy in short?
She grew up
Yeah.
speaking low German.
Okay.
Kids.
Where?
Yeah,
Just 2 miles south here.
okay.
They would wear shorts if they could.
My son had about had to stand at the door, just stop. Hey, put your short, put your pants on, get your.
My kids now, they'll wear pants and their shorts over it, just to.
Yeah. But I'm just walking from the car to the building, you know?
Until your car flips.
Yep.
You had did you guys have a fire alarm hold not that, maybe a couple winters ago when it was super cold out?
Yeah.
If somebody's
See,
baby.
that's what you gotta tell them about, that's why you wear pants in the winter, you don't wanna be outside in the cold. shorts.
Yeah, in the high school, somebody's vaping in the bathroom,
Is that what it was?
I heard all this
God, it
commotion.
was like 15
Outside.
below, and all of a sudden I looked outside my office, and there's kids outside with no coats, and they're
Everywhere.
wondering what to do with all these kids freezing their butts off.
Yeah.
Open the doors, let them in.
Yeah.
We had, so
That's what I did. I went in there and shop door, and
Yep.
yeah,
they filled the place up.
we had, somebody put a pot on a toaster. Yeah,
Hey, everybody.
we all went to.
Man, they are.
7:01.
We went outside and pulled the ball in the gym.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure it is, somewhere.
Think you're good to go, Mr. Chairman?
Okay. Call the meeting to order. Do we have any additions to the agenda?
We have one change, I have on the agenda, the minutes of the September 26th regular meeting, it's actually the November 21 regular meeting.
Okay. With that change, do we have an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, for a public hearing, do we have to? We don't have to change either.
Nope, so, just need to declare it open.
We open up public hearing for the City of Lennox subdivision regulations. You want to read it?
Let's go ahead and, this is a reminder, we won't take a vote while during the public hearing, we'll take the vote on the 2 items during new business.
Okay, at the very end.
Yep. Good? Guys, how you doing?
Mitch, are you?
Aaron, I wore my tie for you.
Nice.
No, we got the subdivision regulations on the docket tonight. These are a set of documents that we actually wrote for the started writing for Harrisburg. They adopted them, say 2 or 3 years ago or so. We also wrote them, translated them over to Hartford, so they've adopted something very similar to this. They've been using them for about a year now. And so this would be kind of the third city where we've implemented them. If you're familiar with the old standards, they're fairly similar still as far as some of the submittals and the procedures that the developer goes through. But there are some added things into here to protect the interests of the city and those types of things. And I thought we could just walk through them here. I could just give you an overview, high level of kind of what's in the document. If you just open up to the table of contents, we can just browse through that quick. But it's basically separated into 5 articles. Article 1 just being the general provisions and just the front end articles, if you will, that talk about a lot of the purpose and authority, jurisdiction, those types of things. Article 2 is the subdivision approval process. That's where we actually lay out the process that the developer goes through as far as submitting a concept plan, a preliminary plan, an engineering submittals after that, and then ultimately the plat. That's really what this whole regulation is kind of set up, is the steps for anybody to submit a plat and get a plat approved, okay? Article 3 is just the plat criteria, we call it. So we have items in there that the face of the plat has to adhere to, the signature pages of the plat has to adhere to. There's certain certificates that have to go on there, whether it's inside of your platting jurisdiction or outside, or in your municipal limits. So it talks about some of those requirements in that article. Article 4 is general requirements, and that's where we just list out some prerequisites, if you will, or assurances that are required with the plat. It also talks about the effective period of approval, so when a preliminary plan is approved, it's good for so many years. That's specified in there. There's exemptions, if we have like someone that's doing grave plots, or maybe a government use parcel or something, those types of plats don't have to adhere to these standards, so there's exemptions for those types of things. And then 4.4 is a subdivisions within unincorporated jurisdictions. So those are plats that fall outside of your municipal limits, but within that joint plat, or that platting jurisdiction that you have, that 3-mile buffer that you have outside of the city, which is, that area is basically, in your comp plan, what that area, that's represented there, I guess. The final appendix A is the subdivision construction agreement, and that's something new to your regulations, and it's something that Sioux Falls has been doing more recently, and Harrisburg and Hartford and a lot of the towns around. That's an agreement that the developer signs if he's proposing a subdivision that has streets and infrastructure that they're asking the city to take over. That's a document then that you sign with the developer, that they agree to a process there to build that infrastructure and turn it over to you folks, okay? With that subdivision construction agreement, they have to post bonds. So that's kind of the big change of it, is it requires the developer to have a third party there to, in case they don't perform the work or aren't able to finish the project. So a third party can pick it up and finish it, okay? You can dive a little deeper into these. I'm not sure how much time we want to spend on them. But I did kind of want to point out just Article 2 a little bit, and maybe some of these assurances in a little bit more depth. So if you go to Article 2, which starts on page 3, you got it's broken out into an overview and a concept plan. So this article has all the steps: concept plan, preliminary plan broken out. First step being this concept plan. Now that's a stage where the developer comes to the city staff with just kind of a napkin drawing. It doesn't have to be an engineering document. It can be their own hand sketches, but it's meant to sit down with them and give them some feedback right off the bat of maybe their street, what they're thinking for a street layout, how they're going to connect to city facilities and those types of things. Trying to give them some input before they go and spend a lot of money on engineering or surveying for that matter. Okay. Again, that's similar to what you have currently. You have a concept plan process. Next up is preliminary subdivision plan. This is an engineering document, and this is similar to what you have currently. Probably the most recent one we've approved was when we did the one for, the countryside edition up there. That was probably the last one that I've seen come through. That was a preliminary approved plan. That was approved by this board, and then it was approved by city council. So they, at that point, they hired an engineer to draft this document. It lays out the streets, lays out what the lots will look like, the lot arrangement. It lays out the sewer and the water, and where they could connect to those facilities. Talks about their phasing plan, and so it's a lot of that type of information that goes into that document. It's reviewed by city staff, reviewed by our office, comes to you folks for a recommendation to approval to the council, and is ultimately approved by the council. Okay. Within there's all sorts of different requirements that we need to have, and that's where actually the requirements aren't in the subdivision regs, they live in the design standards. Okay, so there's a whole chapter on submittals and design standards, and that's where they can give this to their engineer. The engineer knows what those submittals need to look like. And so that's a whole nother section in here that says exactly what kind of information you have to have on there. For you folks, the important thing is that we've reviewed it, staff has reviewed it, you get a chance to review it, so if you have any concerns about how they're laying things out, you have that opportunity to express that. Okay? Once they have approved the preliminary plan, then it goes on to the engineering submittals, and this is where the only thing that's probably that is not in the preliminary plan is a lot of the drainage calcs, okay, because that becomes really intense for the engineers to put together. So really we have that as a separate document, so after the boards have approved it, the engineers are basically able to sit down and hammer out all the intricate design details of those. So that's a document that their engineer puts together, we review it with city staff, and that gets approved administratively. Okay, it doesn't come back to the board. As long as we feel that it adheres to the preliminary plan and the intent of what was approved, that particular submittal gets approved just at the city staff level. Okay? Once they have the engineering done and the preliminary plans done, then they're able to submit a plat for that subdivision. Okay, so that plat will have, they might be platting off roads, they might be platting off a handful of lots in there. We review that to make sure that it adheres to the preliminary plan that was approved, it adheres to the engineering submittals that were submitted. And then there's also, I wanted to point out this 2.5.2, which are prerequisites. Okay, so for that plat, they have to have the approved preliminary subdivision plan, approved engineering submittals, and executed subdivision construction agreement. So if they have roads or infrastructure that's going to be part of this, they have to sign that document, post those bonds before that plat can be approved. Okay. They have to execute maintenance agreements for shared facilities. If they had anything where, say it was sometimes you'll see a detention pond, or maybe they got a common space that is meant to be remain private, then we want to see those maintenance agreements and see, if they're setting up a homeowners association or something like that, that would be part of these maintenance agreements that we would want to see, so we know who's going to be maintaining those types of facilities. Okay. Contributions for public space. In this regulation, there's a section that talks about they have to make a dedication or a land grant for parks. Okay, and I can show you that later in the document of how that works, but basically we asked the developer to try to implement recreation into his plan to begin with, and if it's we asked him to do that first, and if he can't meet that for some reason, then there's an option of a cash contribution towards the park fund. Okay. The other requirements is the plat and cost recovery fees. If we had any cost recovery fees that they were in a district where there was money owed for a utility or infrastructure that was put in ahead of them that they're now connecting to, they'd be responsible to pay those. I don't know of any cost recoveries that you guys have out there right now, so that probably won't come into play very often. But if down the road you end up adding some of those, then that would come into play. Agreements for annexation. We were requiring those on any plat that's outside your municipal limits, in that plating jurisdiction. Okay, and we felt that was important to bring into these, that's something you don't currently have in your regulations. So if it's a plat just outside your city limits, you have the ability to deny or approve that plat. But if you do approve it, we're gonna require that they sign an annexation agreement so that when you do become contiguous to that plat, they voluntarily will come into your city limits, so they don't become an obstacle that way for growth. Okay? So that's kind of generally the stepping process to the plat. And then I wanted to just pick out a bit more on this Article 4, the general requirements. Here's again where we just spell out a little closer these assurances that we have listed. Again, one being the subdivision construction agreement, we kind of talked about that already, maintenance agreements, the public space contributions. Here's where we lay out how that works, and again, we're asking the developers to first try to dedicate that land. If it's a small plat, if we have a park right next to it already or something that just doesn't fit the bill, that we don't feel it's necessary for them to provide space, then that's where the cash contribution probably would come in more often. And right now it's set at $1,000 per acre. That's just what, I think, that goes back a long ways. I think Brandon had that once upon a time in their regulations, and that's, everybody kind of adopted that somewhere along the line. And that's what a lot of these regulations are set at. To me, it kind of comes across as pretty light, as far as a cost there, because it's probably way easier for the developer to pay that fee than to dedicate the land. So that might be something you guys might want to consider if you want to change that. I know that everybody else is right at that same $1,000 an acre. But anyway, I wanted to point that out to you, and then I wanted to just point out the annexation piece of plats that are fall in that jurisdiction and how that works. We kind of talked about it when that plat comes through and it's outside in your jurisdiction. This regulation would require them to sign that annexation agreement. Okay. If you go to the next page, page 17, effective period of approval and amendments. This basically spells out that a preliminary subdivision plan, once it's approved, is good for 4 years. Okay. You can also, it goes on to say that the board can always extend that if for some reason they're still developing and that preliminary plan is still good and meets all of our standards, we can always extend that and beyond that 4 years. Engineering submittals are good for 3 years, kind of the same thing there. If we feel they still are in line with the standards and they want to keep moving forward with them, we can always extend that but that would come back to you folks as a board to grant that extension. I think that's all I want to point out there. If you go to the next page with exemptions, here's where we do call out, we have first exemptions to the process. If your current standards have what we call minor plat written into there, and this brings that same minor plat thought process into the subdivision reg. So if we have a plat that's only a replat, say, and it's just moving a property line, we don't want to have it go through the preliminary plan and all that stuff. So we give them they're able to apply for an exemption as a minor plat, and that basically exempts them from the preliminary plan process. Depending on the plat, they might still need some engineering, to look at what they're doing, if there's any engineering issues, but it exempts them from that preliminary plan process for certain. Okay, and then to meet that minor plat requirement, your current standard probably says something to the effect where if it's more than 3 lots and it's got a lot of hard lined kind of requirements. And what we found is over the years, it seems like any minor plat that truly should be minor plat, there's always something that doesn't meet on there. So we decided to get rid of those requirements and just made it at the discretion of your city staff. Okay, it's listed the authorized official, which to me, Nate would be the authorized official of this regulation, which might be something we should be considering too, is probably assigning that designation. I don't know if that is assigned, and probably is already. But
I'd have to go back to the ordinance that created the position of city administrator. I think it did, but if it doesn't, we can easily do so by either resolution or.
Right. So that discretion is left to him to determine whether this is a minor plat or whether they should go through the preliminary plan process. Okay? Again, there's exemptions for cemetery grade plats, age lots, which are government use parcels. They are exempt from the whole regulation. And here, 4.4 is subdivisions within unincorporated jurisdiction. That second paragraph, 4.4.2, this is the paragraph that basically gives you the ability to deny or approve plats outside of that, your municipal limits in that subdivision jurisdiction area. And when you read that, the city hereby discourages premature subdivision of land due to unavailability of urban services, higher energy consumption, premature and excessive loss of agricultural land, and efficient delivery of basic government services. A plat within the city's unincorporated jurisdiction that is considered to be to the city to be premature, to conflict with the purpose of these regulations, or to conflict with the city's comprehensive plan will be denied. Okay. So if you feel for any reason that a certain plat like that doesn't mesh with, the comp plan, or if you think it's premature, you're able to deny it based on those grounds.
Say if I wanted to do something west of the golf course, that would be,
You could consider that premature, yeah. I think we did and have in the past. But if there's no urban services out there, that's when we typically consider that to be premature subdivision.
I can provide an update on such a process
really,
after the meeting if you would.
But that's everything in a nutshell, and then the chapter 5 is definitions, and then the appendix is the subdivision construction agreement. Any questions?
how many acres is that new one out there, the new
Just shy of
80? So if they decide not to put a park in, they'd be on the hook for,
80,000?
or are they grandfathered in and don't?
No, they gotta adhere to this.
We've
They gotta adhere to this, so
Yeah.
And we've discussed,
if they don't put any parkland, they gotta come up with 80,000?
I think it's in the,
Yes.
I think they're gonna have to have,
Yeah,
because they
they're
need to
gonna have-
mitigate some wetland stuff anyway, so.
Oh, okay.
And I think I believe your current regulation already has some
It does.
language
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that, so it's easy.
80,000 would go a long ways to city pool.
Not as far as one would think.
I was kidding.
Be nicer to have a park out there.
It would, especially
Pretty
because
good
then
slide.
because those kids will have to cross a pretty busy street to
Yeah.
get to the park.
Yeah.
And that's why we've discussed having, I think it's pretty important to have one out there.
I think something you don't wanna do is a town like Harrisburg. They have like really zero parks and recreation in that town. I mean, it's getting better now, but for years,
There was nothing on it.
nothing over there.
And the way, Lennox isn't broken up, I think, I don't think we're broken up in a way that requires all kinds of parks all over the place, but a few neighborhood parks would serve certain neighborhoods really well.
Yeah, I think so too.
Any questions?
It's just a little bit more than what we had before.
It's cleaning up some language, making a few other things a little
Yeah,
clearer.
you guys is, you're on the CCOG model kind of, from years past right now. And yours especially has some different waivers, if I remember, written into it. And then the issue we've always had with kind of the CCOG documents a little bit, and we've gone over this with CCOG, but there's design standards that are in your subdivision regs that we write that are conflicting with the engineering design standards a lot of times, so we just took the approach, get all the design standards out of the subdivision regs and let that be in the engineering design standards, and just so they're separated that way. So that actually brought a lot of language out of your regulation.
Simplified it.
Yeah. And then the design standards, if you're wondering, they've been updated too, they've been overhauled. Right now, you basically, we wrote them years ago and just took Sioux Falls and slapped your Lennox on it.
Yeah,
And so we've taken the time, even with Harrisburg and with Hartford, just to, because you're not Sioux Falls and you're small, all the big city stuff doesn't always apply. And so we wrote a shorter, more concise standard for a town your size. And so it still has a lot of the same design practices, I guess, if you want. It still references Sioux Falls because they do still have some good practices that we want to implement. But it's just a little bit more consolidated.
Good enough?
that's good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep.
Visitors to be
Before we
heard.
move on, Mr. Chairman, I need you to close the open hearing, public hearing.
Close public hearing.
Yep.
Got a motion?
Sorry, you made a motion, you just declare it closed.
Declare closed.
And 10 seconds.
All right. Okay, do I need approval of the minutes of September 21st, regular meeting? How come we're
Wasn't
way
it
back?
November
November 21st.
November.
21st.
Bring it up. Did you read it?
Mhm.
You
So moved.
Okay,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
All right. We don't have any old business?
We do not.
Good old people. Okay, new business. We got the City of Lennox subdivision regulations and the City of Lennox design standards. Do I have a motion to approve them as?
We'll do one and then the other.
Okay.
Yep.
The City of Lennox subdivision regulations, I need a motion to approve them.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The City of Lennox design standards, I need a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. An adjournment, I need a motion.
Joe, you like that?
Like that one? You wanna do it today?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
And that's it?
Good meeting. Don't you make it to that bathroom?
Yeah.
I can still see the.
Still make the game, Frank.
Yeah, still
I'm
make
glad
that.
you
Me
know.
too.
Huh?
Me too. I gotta pick up my husband because he's got my.
Do you like playing?
Just put it behind my door, yeah.
He's down with school.
That's right.
Your kid's out of school?
Yeah.
What's he doing?
Working at Sioux Falls Ford.
There's design calculations.
That's
Nice.
good.
410.
For them to adhere to.
Nice. Service department?
Yeah.